Okay, it is 6:31. We're going to call the Newcastle Planning Board meeting to order. The date is November 17th, 2022. And the second item on the agenda is to review the minutes from October 20th, 2022. I have a motion on the minutes from you. I'm going to second because you weren't here. And oh, here we go. Peter, how are you? Okay, any discussion about the minutes? No, God, you're fine. Just started. I thought the minutes were wonderful. Honestly, they're great, concise. Didn't miss anything. Did you do it from the video after, or did you do it?
Yeah, I did it from the video.
You
I
did.
can't do both at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So, no comments or corrections or anything to the minutes. All in favor of approving the minutes from October 20th? 3, 1 abstaining. Moving on. We don't have anyone here. We have no applications tonight, and we have no one from the public here. So we're going to move right on to new business. And the first item is discussion of draft memo and finding of facts templates. So this is what Isabel's been working on, and we started this discussion last month. So take it away.
Yeah. So I kind of transposed it in the packet, but about halfway through the packet, there's a staff report and recommendation page. And this is like basically a template I've put together to kind of show what my work to you all will look like. We kind of had a brief discussion at the last meeting about sort of expectations for working together. And I noted that my role is to provide a review of the application and then a professional recommendation based on my review. In the case of planning board projects, I don't have decision-making authority in the code. That is left to you all, but I do like to provide sort of a summary of the project and some draft findings of fact for you to consider. And the findings of fact are essentially the legal notice of decision. If, God forbid a project got appealed, that would be sort of the binding document that shows how the planning board came to the conclusions that were made on the project. It's kind of long, and I wanted to note that I kind of noted in the comments in the document that there would be, some of these standards would be removed if they weren't applicable, of course, but I wanted to kind of show like what it would look like, and all of the things that I would consider in making my recommendations to you all. And then I also noted on the last page of the memo template document that I would like to eventually get to the point of adopting like recommended conditions of approval, or standard conditions of approval for projects. So those would be things that would apply to every single project and would sort of be like another piece of the process that you can communicate to applicants. Since this is sort of the binding notice of decision, where the hope is always that the applicant, if they read nothing else in the whole process, they actually read this. And it provides sort of what they need to do to make the approval meet our standards.
Before we move on from that,
Yep.
Can we just talk a little bit more about what sorts of things you're talking about for the standard conditions of approval? Like give some examples, because.
Yep. So I put 2 in here. One of them, obviously, the approval is dependent upon the proposals and plans contained in the application. Just noting that variation from the plans would need to come back to the planning board or the relevant permitting authority prior to any implementation. I think we discussed this with the project we reviewed at the last meeting where they thought it was unclear that they had to return to the planning board or whatever they mentioned. And I think just having something like specifically noting any changes need to return. And then I also would recommend like something along the lines of this decision runs with the land and is binding upon future owners and heirs. Just so that that is
Sure.
communicated effectively.
But these are conditions of the process, not conditions of standards.
So you could also use it, for example, trying to think of something where this might come into play.
Well, that's where I was like,
Yeah.
that's what I was thinking.
So for example, most projects will include a lighting plan, but if they haven't finalized the specs of the lighting, or they haven't finalized something with the interior of the project, or they haven't finalized something with the windows, you might tack on a condition of approval, such as like all exterior lighting is to be dark sky compliant, or some, something like that.
Right.
All landscaping is is required to be made of native species, things like that that are sort of in line with what the ordinance is recommending, but perhaps the applicants don't know that at the time of application. So it would be sort of things like that.
Okay. Yeah, I was trying to think of things like that they hadn't already. I'm sure there are some. I'm sure there's a bunch that we haven't like teased out in the actual code standards, but I couldn't wrap my brain around what the code standard would be. It's the standard conditional.
Yeah.
So,
For example, to use Damascata as an example, they have one that requires that lighting is either turned off or turned down to like safety to a reasonable safety level in the evening.
Yep.
So that there's not like glare coming off of properties at night. And one of those that could be a standard that like lighting is going to be turned down or turned off. Sometimes like it'll be things like the fire department wants to see a Knox box. You need to communicate the location of that to the fire department. That's not necessarily in our code,
Right.
but is a nice,
Yeah,
nice important thing to have. So
we had that conversation twice this past year. So.
Yeah.
2 different applicants. Yeah. Okay, great.
And then the findings of fact, in most cases, I hope we get to a point where I can kind of anticipate the questions that you all will ask and the concerns that you might have, and that findings of fact are basically my recommendation, because I've already done the background work of ensuring that the application is complete, negotiating with the applicants for the best possible project that's actually in line with our ordinance standards, verifying that it's in line with our ordinance standards. And then your role is really just to serve as a check on that process and ask any relevant questions that you might have. So the findings of fact you'll likely see that those are almost exactly my memo. But we do have to adopt separate findings for each project. And I put that together with just a little bit more of like a summary of the project at the beginning.
Right.
Some legal ease.
Yep. So one of the sort of overarching questions that I had sort of reviewing this and looking at it was during the process of developing the current code and everything, there was so much discussion about the process of applications. And I mean, we were just hung up on the idea of checkboxes. Like you check the checkbox, you're good. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like we didn't, and to a certain extent, I feel like we've got And so I guess I just want to like hear from you and kind of understand a little bit more, like, it seems like we're favoring more words in the finding of facts or the memo than we are just checkboxes. And like, I feel like that's intentional, but I want to understand why, because, you know, for people, for, you know, for applicants to get, I don't know how many pages is it?
Pretty
12?
significant page doc.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, here's your woo, you know, instead of just like, here's a list of you're approved, it's good.
Is it possible to have the checkbox page as the page that they pay attention to, and if they have a question, they can refer to?
Dive further.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's what you were kind of getting at, right? With the, right on the first page there, right?
Yeah, I wanted to have something that, well, so I was intending for that to be a checkbox, basically for your knowledge that these are the standards that I reviewed this by, because these are the ones that are applicable. But I
Okay.
think that we could also adapt it further if that was sort of where you wanted to go, of like, the first page is just, these are the standards that are applicable. And under that is like, check they have been met. I think I tried to get into that with like the template of the memo too, where each section was its own box, and then I put like staff recommends that the project complies as proposed.
Right.
To answer your question about sort of why I'm in favor of more words, frankly, it is mostly for record keeping of staff on our end. I like to, you know, 10 years from now, be able to go back into a project and say, why did the planning board approve it that way? Or what was the discussion around that item? And why was it that?
Because it's a precedent as well.
Right, exactly.
That's the significance.
Right. And then for the code officer to be able to understand the discussion that was had, how did the planning board come to this decision, and have it sort of spelled out in a sentence or two in the record, I think is mostly helpful for staff. That piece would be less helpful for the applicants.
Right.
So maybe it is like a cover sheet of a checklist of like, here's what we found. But I think for me, and then for the code officer, and for anyone that comes after us, it's really helpful to be able to understand how things were reviewed.
Yeah.
And why that conclusion was came to, because it did establish a precedent.
No, I love that. And honestly, I mean, I guess I'm less concerned with giving the applicant a huge long thing, as long as there's something that's, like you said, they zero in on this and it says approved or whatever the case may be, fine. If they don't read anything, they got to read that.
Yeah.
I'm actually thinking part of my thought is just sort of, as we're reorganizing the way we do business, when we didn't have professional support, it was understood that the planning board members would obviously review each application.
Yep.
Thoroughly, right? We'd go through, we'd do the checks.
Yep.
Right? We'd check all the standards, we'd check all the stuff, you know, and we'd have the conversation here about, do you read it this way? Does it make sense? You know what I mean? And so shifting all of that basically to you, it seems like, to provide at least the check on your recommendation. It'd be nice to have something, and I'm sorry, I'm coughing. It'd be nice to have something that, instead of us having to read through the 16 pages or whatever it is to uncover like where the actual sort of questions are,
Mhm.
we had that quick checklist at the beginning, and
Yeah.
it was along the lines of here's what was reviewed, here's what was not applicable. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then if I got that, for example, I might look at the checklist and go, okay. Oh, I'm going to go read the code at this section and see why you put the checkbox there. I'll go read that section in the memo you put. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's a really easy cross-reference, I think, for any planning board member to do, right? And so I don't know what you guys think. I don't want to create more work for you. I just wonder if it would help streamline our review process without eliminating.
Right. And I don't necessarily want to, I don't want to eliminate your review process. What I do want to do is arm you with knowledge that you have a staff person reviewing these things, and that, you know, I have discussed this with the code officer and this is the conclusion that we came to. And to circle back to my previous point, I think that's the other value of having it like written in words is to say like, this is how I came to this conclusion.
Right.
But you don't have to agree with me. This is just my recommendation. But yeah, I think having like a checklist or something at the beginning to say like, these are the ones that are applicable. These are the ones that have been met. Here's one or two that I might flag for discussion.
Right.
And I will also add that I would plan to do like a presentation during the meeting of every project to flag the specific items that in my mind need further discussion.
Were you gonna say something, Peter?
No, I'm just trying to put it together in my head why I like the idea is that going through the entire code, I still get lost in trying to figure out where I need to be. And I'm perfectly capable of doing that if I'm getting some initial hints at where to look and then question what I'm seeing if it doesn't make sense to me. That reduces the amount of time that I'm spending. It doesn't stop me from reviewing it, right? It can put my 2 cents in or say, check, love it, right? We can now ask some questions to me.
And I think it turns it on its head a little bit because I feel like so much of previous planning board effort has been in not just interpretation, but like understanding where in the code that standard is.
Yeah.
You know what I
It's
mean?
key for me.
Right. And now if we have that sort of, that quick reference, so we got the memo, you got a little checklist, you can go right there and then you're not spending so much brain energy trying to understand how that fits in with absolutely everything. You're just reading that one standard and wondering if that applies. And I think for me, at least, that sort of changes what I have to think about. And I can ask more meaningful questions about just that standard.
Mhm. I was just gonna say, really what I would like to arm you all with is like the ability to ask meaningful questions rather than having to go through every single standard step by step.
I mean, the past planning board has, you checked this for years, right? Yes. It was 27. And you had to vote on every single one. It was annoying. I want to do it. But yeah, I like this. I like this format. Now that I see it, I'm actually really anxious to see it from like in it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll adapt that first page and maybe bring it back at the next, well, I will bring it back at the next meeting and see what you think about what I've come up with.
Cool.
I might have to noodle around with that a little bit more, but I think I can come up with something.
Okay. Or maybe it can be, it could be a cover page and it could also be, like you said, you've got a box for each sort of article. Right?
Mhm.
So maybe it could be in the header of each article subsection. I don't know. I gotta think about that. But you know that what you've done basically the same thing that I did when I made that checklist. Basically just looked at the table of contents. Because that's all it is. With check marks next to it. Okay. Did you have some other questions or comments, things you wanted us to discuss?
I don't think so. I think I was just like flagging things that might have been like confusing, that like might have made sense in my head, but probably wouldn't make sense if you're just looking at it. And I think the recommended conditions of approval piece could be something we could pursue further in like an amendment to the bylaws that we'll talk about in a second. But I think it's going to take some time of reviewing applications to understand like what are conditions that we're applying to like most projects here. And what should we add as like something that's just standard.
All right, well, I love the direction this is going, honestly. Really excited, obviously. A whole nother level of professionalism. You want to move on to talking about the bylaws?
Yeah. So like I said, I kind of transposed the packet, so the bylaws are actually at the beginning. I think it's page 4 of the PDF. What I did was the select board recently adopted bylaws in January, so I kind of looked to them for some structure, but then adapted it to what we would need. So sort of the authority piece, and the board structure piece and the attendance piece pretty much mirrors the select board, and then it sort of goes off from there. The agendas piece, I think, is, fairly straightforward, but I did note that I was anticipating that a posting to the town's website by 5 on the Friday before the meeting would be sufficient. That's not, it's 6 days before the meeting, and I would anticipate emailing it to you that day as well. Is that typically enough turnaround time for you all to review the packet?
Yeah, well, I mean, as long,
Yeah.
for me, as long as we have a week.
Mhm.
My schedule in Newcastle is Wednesdays and Thursdays. So I would not anticipate often posting on a Friday, but I wanted to give that extra day just for leeway. And then that would also be the anticipation that, packets would be complete, applications would have been reviewed for completeness. You're looking at something that is sort of a fully baked project. The one thing I did want to point out was regarding the public hearing section. This is under number 6, administrative procedures. I wanted us to have a conversation about 3 minutes being a sufficient amount of time to speak. The select board bylaws are 5 minutes per subject. I asked Sarah to clarify that for me today, and she said that it's basically like if a concern is regarding traffic, and that's a subject, everyone only has 5 minutes to speak on traffic.
Which is illegal.
Each,
No. Total. Which means you may not get a chance.
Yeah, so I'm a little bit concerned about that piece in the context of a planning board meeting where we have to hear all evidence that someone may want to provide. So I just kind of left it broad. Members of the public will have 3 minutes to speak.
Yeah, it actually, I mean, I don't want to do the 5 minutes per subject. I'm pretty sure that's illegal. But we're not the select board. And I'd probably up it, honestly. I'd probably give members at least 5 minutes.
wouldn't you could even write in here that you have the option to, if clearly there's a point that's being made, you have the option to say, listen, I'm overruling the 3 minutes. It's going to be until we get this sorted out.
Yep.
Or I'm going to add, 1 minute, 2 minutes.
Or
See what he would-
we can say, if someone is just repeating what someone else has already said, we can say,
Enough.
if you have something new to add to the conversation, please do that. Otherwise, wrap up your comments. I think you put that in there, right?
You just need the authority to control the meeting. That's the important part.
Guided.
So guided. I like that word better.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. And I think that this would provide those guardrails.
Yeah, so I put 3 minutes, but you're right that the chair has the authority to extend that time if like you mentioned, a point is being made or whatever. The 3-minute guideline is really if somebody's coming up here and just sort of, I don't want to say spouting nonsense, but that's sort of what I'm trying to get at.
People get nervous, especially when they're told they have a time limit.
Yeah.
And then,
they end up rambling maybe a little bit more than they intended to, and it's harder to get to a point when they're feeling stressed.
Yeah.
I get that. Not everyone's good at public speaking.
Yeah.
So I'm inclined to let them speak until they can kind of formulate their thoughts and get it out, because that's what we really want. And sometimes that takes, and that's great. I'm happy. But if someone just wants to come up and yell with no point, we need a mechanism to say, please make a point or sit down.
Or come and yell for 3 minutes, but then you have to sit down.
Then you need to sit down, let someone else yell.
Yeah.
I was wondering, talk about, having some of the guardrails for public comments. If someone's coming, the whole purpose of speaking is just sharing concerns about code,
Mhm.
is that something where we as a board would just say, that's not the scope of what we're discussing, this is a public hearing about the code, if you have concerns, please meetings, or select them, or at a meeting, at the next meeting, because I can see that becoming a thing where projects then become, conversation about the code versus what we're actually here for. We're not.
We're not here to change the code. We're here to abide by it.
Yeah. There's a way to tease that out or specify.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So like as you're on application review, that's not the time for discussion of like changes to the code. But I think it's frankly a good practice to have people orient their comments around the code and say like, well, this section of the code says this, and this is why I think this project doesn't meet that. Or if they do have genuine concerns about standards that are not strict enough in their mind or whatever, I think that would be more under the like public comments section of the meeting that we add. That can theoretically be public comments on anything. So I think if it's in the context of a project, maybe we let them speak, but I think that would be like sort of at the chair's discretion.
This has always been the thing for me, and we've discussed this at the select board over the years, is when is the appropriate time of meeting for public? It's always an issue, because oftentimes, and I know I myself, when I'm sitting there, question doesn't occur to me till after public comments have passed. So it may be that I'm listening to an application being reviewed. Public comments were second thing on the agenda, but now we're fourth thing on the agenda. And I have a general question, but I can't actually ask it. Very frustrating.
Yeah.
And I personally feel that if someone takes the time to leave their living room and come to a meeting here in person and show up, and they have a question, it may not be able to be a discussion, but it should be allowed somehow to be voiced. And it may not need to be answered. It may not need to be discussed. It may not, but they were here and they made the effort. That should be rewarded, or at least acknowledged.
Yeah.
So, the one thing I see that we didn't do. Hey, how we doing? We'll catch up in just a second. But just let me finish my thought real quick. The one thing that we don't have in here that I've often seen in other bylaws is actually like they'll put how the agenda is supposed to flow, right? But like specifically,
Mhm.
And I don't know if does the current Board of Selectmen bylaws do that, where it says this will be the first thing, this will be the second thing, this will be the third thing, and it will contain these things.
I actually don't think that it
does?
does. Yeah.
I don't know that I'm for it. I guess I'm putting a question out, because if you look like at our agenda, right, for today, public comments is number 4, and that actually does come after applications. But I think at the select board, public comments is literally the second thing in the meeting.
Yeah, they may know that an application is going to be made. You might want to ask questions about it. And if the application is done after public comments, they don't. Can you
Yeah.
have public comments after each application? Is that a real waste of time?
No, I mean,
I mean,
technically, I think we're supposed to open public comments for each application
Deliberate.
before we deliberate about it. For each one, right?
Yeah,
You
that's what I
open
mean.
public comments and close it for each application, but then the general comments, like you're saying, someone says, yeah, well, I have a general question about how the code works and if this is right, whatever. I only thought of it because this person's doing this thing. I guess I'm happy where public comments we have listed right now is, I just think it's something to be aware of. Moving forward.
Maybe you say at the beginning of the meeting. The agenda says public comments, we're gonna have public comments after each application, at the end there'll be time for a question.
That's actually a great idea. Maybe what we could do is just write that on the agenda. You know what I mean? Like just in parentheses or something like that. Or maybe at the bottom of the sheet or something where it just says, because people will often come in and they'll grab a copy of the agenda, right? And if it says in words on the agenda, you know, there'll be a time for public comment for each application, and general public comments should follow after that don't specifically relate to applications being reviewed tonight.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It is also best practice, like if you're holding a public hearing on an application to specifically say public hearing on an application for blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's a good idea.
But people do, they cross pollinate, you know what I mean? And so like, you know, when Merle came and he had a question, and I kind of said like, that's not time to talk about this. And that's hard sometimes because I don't want to shut people down, but we need to make sure that there are firm sort of understandings about when you talk about certain things and when you don't talk about certain things, you know what I mean? Like, otherwise we'll just
Well,
have like crazy conversations all over the place.
If there's a standard and the standard is written down, you can refer to that and say, I'm sorry, this doesn't fit here. That can come in at the end, or and then you wait until the end, and then you can say, sorry, that conversation is not for now. Or we can't resolve it. Whatever.
We have a general disclaimer. Says it scope of doing, we have a question.
Mhm.
People feel like they're not being heard.
You could have all of that, as you just said, at the bottom of the agenda page.
Yeah.
Because it's going to apply to every single meeting.
It will, yeah. Yeah, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's, I think it would be, I would
Sort of a
recommend
disclaimer.
both. Yeah, that's okay. I was gonna say, I would recommend both, having it on the agenda, but also you giving, even if it's like a 2-sentence speech of like, this is the order that things will be taken during this public hearing. First, Isabel will introduce the project, then we'll turn to the applicants, then the board will ask any questions, then we'll open the public hearing again. Like, I think that that is really helpful for members of the public to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
It keeps going back to like, I live and breathe this stuff. I can go to any public hearing and know what to expect, but like 95% of people probably don't.
80%.
Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
So it's like, it's nice to give them like both on the agenda and a disclaimer in the meeting, like this is how this.
Would you be up for just writing a quick script?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I'm, you know, when we have applicants and we have members of the public and stuff like that, I'm more than willing to give a little tiny, this is just how it works. And this is what to expect. But I'm not going to remember everything every time. Sorry. We're on bylaws.
Yeah.
And we did go already through the draft memo and finding of facts. Real quick, do you want to just catch Lucas up real quick?
Yeah, so what was in the packet was, we kind of had that brief discussion at the last meeting of like what my role would be. We were kind of trying to suss that out. And so I put together sort of a template memo that I would provide to the planning board on projects, sort of outlining what standards are applicable, the findings that I've made on those standards, and providing some draft recommendations or other items for the planning board to consider. We did kind of talk about doing like a cover page or some sort of checklist that makes it like very easy to understand of what I'm saying in my memo. Um, and it's not necessarily for me to like make a decision on behalf of the board, but really to aid you all in like asking good questions and being well informed when you come to the meetings of, you know, some of these application packets are like 500 pages long. And I like that stuff and I do that for my job and I get paid to do that. But I know that you guys don't get paid to look through 600 pages of materials. So um yeah, that was sort of the context there. And then we have to adopt findings of fact documents, basically to serve as like the notice of decision on projects. So um, the template will hopefully, if once I get to know you all better and understand what your concerns are, the findings of fact will hopefully frequently match the recommendations in my memo, but the planning board is always welcome to change the findings of fact that I've drafted or add to it or whatever through the course of deliberations in the meeting. But that was the context with that item, is that I wanted to give like a primer of what to expect from me when we have a permit on the agenda.
And the other part, I think, just tailing on what we've already said, just for your benefit, was that the idea of that checklist would be so that planning board members could expediently do a review based on stuff that we just see, like it might be a checkbox so this doesn't apply, so you don't have to go read the whole code every time. But if you see that check, maybe you want to go and maybe there'll be a flag on it or something. This is for discussion. Be an easy way to sort of cross-reference the check mark to the memo to the book. So that we're not having to review the whole code ever.
Yeah.
And read a whole bunch of things, because I mean, I do that all the time. Like, you know, I just think, well, okay, I use here and I gotta check the definition, and I gotta go here and I gotta check that. You know what I mean? You do that spider web thinking. I just love the idea of not having to do all that and just go read the actual standard and then discuss the standard. So while you were talking, I just thought of one thing. I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we actually have to vote to adopt a process for the finding of facts. Like, that's not an application form.
No.
It's just an internal process.
I was mostly just giving that to you for the purposes of discussion
Yeah.
so that I could get your feedback. Because I want to obviously provide a work product that's helpful to you all.
Yeah.
They do take a considerable amount of time, but I want to, I want to do it so it's helpful. So
Yeah, I think it's great. Do you have anything you wanted to talk about, or did you notice that?
No.
So let's pop back over to the discussion about the bylaws, because I think that my hope, my intention is that if we're relatively happy with how this is put together, at least for now, of course, they can be amended, modified at any time. But I'd like us to maybe vote on these things. I guess. I think it's a great place to start. The other couple of questions. We talked about the discussion time. Pretty much it, right?
the one thing I wanted to note is that section 10 under application forms, I did note that all applications for planning board review shall be submitted on an application form, which is attached as Appendix A. And it is not attached because it's still under development. I'm hoping to have those for you at the December meeting. I don't necessarily see a reason why you couldn't adopt this today and amend it with the appendix once the forms are completed, but it might be confusing for, you know, a month until we do that.
Any question? Or someone is excused. That the amendment just to ask the person. stop, 'cause it just seems like that'd be kind of embarrassing. To send something to town to be given a slap on the wrist.
Should-
Yep.
You know,
I wondered actually when I read that if it should be a vote. Of you know, a vote of the quorum of the planning board.
Well, we just had that, so I think it's clearly something.
Yes, and we did. We just sort of made that process up though.
Right.
But yeah, I agree. I guess I would say that, yes, the select board appoints planning board.
Mhm.
However, we have, you know, someone who's consistently not showing up without, you know, giving any notice or reason, or just, you know, we do have, the interest of the town is to have a full board.
Yeah.
You know, so I think maybe we just say something like you know, that the planning board has to take a vote to pass a recommendation to the select board to remove the member and replace with a new. They don't like taking responsibility for stuff they don't have to take responsibility for. So if we pass along actual recommendation, they have to do.
Well, it should be our responsibility anyway, frankly,
Yes.
to make a recommendation, not to make the rule.
we get over first. Resign. Who would they send?
A resignation? Yeah, to the town. Yeah, we would pass it to the board would have to act on it. Yeah. Okay. The only other question actually I had, was some stuff procedurally about voting on this, voting on that, voting on this, voting on that. Get that. I guess we'll leave it in there. But I mean, for the sake of expediency, I'm probably gonna refer, I'm just gonna rely on saying, you know, without objection, so that's sort of like legal shortcut for not voting.
Oh, like the board will vote to open the public hearing, the board will vote to close the public hearing.
It's a lot of voting.
Yeah.
So like, I think for most procedural things, just in the course, we can leave it in here, but I just, you know, I'll say, you know, without objection, we're gonna do this. And if anyone has an objection, that's the time to say, no, let's vote, because I want to talk about it. Versus, you know, I will always call for a vote on an action, you know what I mean? So like on an actual approval or an amendment or a condition or whatever the case may be, there'll always be a show of hands vote that. But for the piddly stuff, you know, I don't want to have to. Second,
Mhm.
or. So, you know. Otherwise, I think we're good. Great place. I'm so glad you're able to put this together. So thank you very much. All right. Does anyone want to make a motion on the adoption of these bylaws?
I'll make the motion. that we
Anybody
adopt the
second it?
bylaws.
Thank you. Second, Kevin. Any further discussion about the bylaws? Seeing none, all in favor of adopting the bylaws? Passes 5-0. So you can change that adopted date today, November 17th, 2022. And we'll roll with it, see how it goes. Thank you. All right, so the last thing on the agenda was continued discussion, development review process and timelines. And maybe as an adjunct to that, I would just like to also add the conversation we started sort of before the meeting began, which was we had started it before, but talking about when and how we want to start bringing code edits and changes. forward.
Yeah, in terms of the development review process, we briefly talked about sort of timelines at the last meeting, and I think the bylaws sort of established, a final date for all items to be available because we have to post them by the Friday before the meeting. But I had provided a couple of recommendations in the item that I included in the last meeting packet. And I think my plan along the conversation of code updates is to kind of come forward with proposed amendments to the code specifically related to the development review process and to my role in that process, basically to codify what we just adopted, partially codify what we just adopted in the bylaws, and then to include the recommendations that I included in my memo from last meeting. Trying to make sure that the process is outlined in a way that's understandable to applicants and members of the public, but also still in a way that we can change if needed and be a little bit nimble about. So I should have draft language available for the December meeting. I just wanted to again plug that if anything in the memo from last time was concerning or you wanted further discussion on, feel free to reach out to me and we can chat about how I came to some of those recommendations, but you seemed pretty supportive when we discussed last time, so I'll move forward with a formal draft.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. The more, and we've talked about this, but the more I've read through the administrative section, we just sort of, now that we have a town planner, realizing that so much of how we crafted the administrative section was because we didn't have a town planner. So we sort of delegated responsibilities and sometimes it's a little odd, like road commissioner was responsible for this or and so now that we actually have the third leg of the stool, we really should put like in the code, we should actually put like what is the role and responsibility of town planner, because we have roles and responsibilities of the different boards and CEO, that's all in. So we should make that addition, and then we should go through and make sure, like you said, everything lines up with the new board. Just, it's not substantive. I don't see it as being substantive changes. It's just procedural. So I don't see it as particularly scary, actually. I think generally everyone's really excited that you're here. And so just putting that in the code. The question is now, that's one change. I mean, that's one change that needs to happen to the code as like a topic. Another topic of change is, subdivision. Sure. There are other changes. So what Isabel and I were talking about just before the meeting was how and when, and we need to have the discussion. Recommending to the town that we make changes to shoreland. Do we hold that for annual town meeting, or do we do a special town meeting and have that same conversation for each topic of things that needs to be addressed? At this point, unfortunately, like we need to add the administrative stuff. We need some changes to the code that are just like updates about miscellaneous stuff, right? Typos, definitions that weren't quite right or didn't mean what word got put in the wrong place, things like that. Very minor, non-substantive changes, but that's a whole nother topic. And my concern has always been if you try to do too many different topics at one meeting, everything gets very confused. But if you take it to the other extreme, we could have a special town meeting every month between now and June to make those changes, which we can. But we can't rely just on annual town meetings to make changes because it'll take us literally forever. 10 years. Yep. So I think we have to develop a strategy. And I think part of that strategy has to encourage the selectmen to hold more special town meeting for us to make changes to. But so we may need to make that a formal process of recommendation.
And just as an aside, that could be a good, like, once we have sort of like a work plan drawn out for like, this is what we want to tackle first, this is what we'll tackle next. This is how long we think these will take us. This is how many hours the town planner will be working on these things.
Right.
It might be helpful for us to bring that to the select board, just as an update item on their agenda to
Right.
say, this is what we're planning to tackle. And if you're interested, pay attention to our agendas. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd rather go to the board, or request a meeting with the board with a work plan proposal in place instead of go and say, hey, we've got 10 things we got to do. What do you think? That's just a mess. So I'm even looking at like, if we can develop this work plan, decide how many things we want to try and combine, and then actually propose, maybe not necessarily dates, but rough timeframes when we'd like to get that done, within a month. So like in February, we'd like to have a special town meeting about a lot. Whatever, we'll hold this for June, but then in September, we want to have another special town meeting for these things. You know what I mean? Those sort of general recommendations.
And recognizing that some of your policy items will be more substantive than others. Frankly, maybe more contentious than others.
Right.
So, blocking out that time on your agendas as well to discuss those.
Speaking of which, December is our next meeting. Date. Oh, 15th. So assuming we don't have a rash of applications that we can deal with. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought of one more thing about the bylaws and we already adopted it, but let's put it down as a change. You put no business after 9, no new business after 9.
Yep.
Yeah, let's make that 8:30. I have a hard and fast rule that if the meeting goes 2 hours, let's go home. Nothing good is going to be accomplished after 2 hours.
Okay.
So if the meeting starts at 6:30, we're done by 8:30.
I think I'm coming here with like some unresolved something from my past life where our planning board meetings went till 11 p.m.
Oh,
twice a
no,
month.
No.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't think of that sooner. But so, assuming we don't have a whole bunch of applications for December, you already said that you're going to draft, you're gonna bring, remind me again,
Application forms
the application forms
and some subdivision amendments for discussion.
and a draft work plan.
And I can do a job work plan.
Is that too much?
No.
Okay. Do you want more? Okay, I think that's great. If we had those things on there and we'll just see if we get applications, we may not be able to tackle it all, but that's fine. Keeps the ball rolling. All right, so number 6 on the agenda is planners report.
Yeah, I just wanted to add this so that I have an opportunity to tell you all what I'm working on. We've kind of talked about a lot of it and you've now seen a lot of it, but I've also updated the planning board and the town planner page on the website to be more current. I've updated all of your minutes and agendas on the planning board page, and now that's completely up to date. And then the town planner department on the website has also been updated to include just another summary of what I've been working on. And then as we get some of the forms and everything else going, we'll upload those as well. I'm just a pretty big believer in the like customer service piece of everything and providing all of that online and making it really easy to understand. So that's been a big thing. And then we've talked a lot about the application forms. That was the other thing I wanted to note that I've been working on lately. And again, we'll have those available at the December meeting.
That's great. Yeah, George and Isabel and I met this morning to talk about application forms. George and Isabel had questions, and we were just sort of all getting sort of on the same page.
Yep.
About what direction to take, and we had conversations about application forms, and so it was, we're moving in that direction. Better, clearer, simpler, at least hopefully simpler to understand forms. Hopefully very simple. Are you thinking that you want to bring drafts, or are you thinking you want to try and bring something to approve for application forms?
I'm hoping I have something ready to approve for application forms. Obviously, again, feel free to discuss it, but hoping to have something ready.
Great.
Yep.
Be awesome. Be a great way to start the new year. All right. Well, that's all that's on our agenda. So without objection, meeting adjourned 7:28.